So deep thoughts. What is employee engagement? How do you guys define it? I think it would be helpful to start out just to lay some basics to get an idea of how you guys think about it.
Yeah, I think we think about it as something to, first of all, something to connect with, like something that the employee can kind of latch on to if you think of a gear. So, you know, providing the connection via people. We have an open work environment where there's no offices in any of our locations. It's all trading desks type environment. So connecting with your colleagues, strong believers in that. We have free hot lunches every day in our Empire State Building location with a full kind of cafe area. So there's a lot of conversations happening there, more connecting with people. And so I think it's really about providing something that the company can, you know, really connect with individuals, and that means our kind of mission as well, which is empowering the world's storytellers. So people tend to be able to connect with that, and then we'll talk a bit more later about some other stuff. But it's providing something, I think, something compelling to latch onto, and then seeing if employees take the bait.
So what I would say to that, and we'll all probably have something very similar, but the way I think about it is, you know, what we're trying to build is a values-based, valuable company. So that, you know, our job is to make people feel valued in order to make the valuation of the company greater. And they're always tied together. Right? I worked at a company once where our most engaged employees were the ones that were providing the least amount of value to that organization. And when we stripped out the data and looked at it, it was like, wow, okay, that tells a story, you know, and it's directly correlated to our earnings per share. And so that's how we think about it at On Deck.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that I joined Jet was because it was very clear to me after meeting with our CEO, Mark Laurie, that he wanted to build a really different kind of company. I think there are many startups up here on the panel. One of the things that I thought was interesting was his interest in building the company from the inside out versus just from the ground up. So even if you think about a startup as sort of constructing a new building, you know, sometimes all of the efforts are placed upon everything that's external, everything that's consumer facing or customer facing. And I think that some of the things that we probably share up here is that we have leaders that understand that investment in people and engagement and culture are necessary and advantageous. So we would define employee engagement as the emotional and intellectual connection that our people have both to the company and to their colleagues, so that it's really a team and it's collaborative, and there's meaning that kind of transcends across professional and personal lives that keeps people engaged and happy.
I kind of couldn't agree more with that, the energy piece, and definitely the product of that. So I didn't mention, we have 300 people at HQ and 275 in our stores. And we make many, many categories. So it's footwear, apparel, accessories. There's no business actually at our size that has as many categories for both men and women. So that speaks to how engaged I kind of assume that our employee base is. But I would say it's also, you almost know the absence of engagement rather than always knowing that it's present. So I think we know what we associate with the negative. We associate attrition, we associate burnout. It's harder to codify what the positive version of that or the presence of it is. But I do think at Rag & Bone, you kind of walk in and you feel that rigor and you feel that energy and you feel that spirit, and that is engagement for us. Yes, you could do all the analytics possible. I'm not a firm believer in those things, but that's kind of how we define it. It's kind of, you don't know, it's a je ne sais quoi, I would say.
So what about some of the initiatives that you guys are rolling out? Like what does that actually look like? What does it manifest itself as? And actually, I think more interestingly, what have you guys tried that hasn't worked?
So I'll kind of hedge that a little bit by describing something that's new, and so far so good. It hasn't fully worked yet, but tracking well. Another thing to engage with would be the specific deliverables of the company in the current year. So we set at the beginning of 2016 company OKRs. OKRs are increasingly popular these days. It came out of Google. There's a bunch of platforms that help companies do this. It's like objectives and key results. So it's kind of like goal setting, but a bit more empowering. We set these big, hairy, audacious goals, and then everybody in the company signs up for their piece of the action. Somewhat filtered by departmental goals. They're encouraged to, everyone's encouraged to kind of bite off a little bit more than they can chew. Hitting 70, 80% of these things is a win. Swing at the fences. We had 100% of employees sign up for their 2016 OKRs by mid-January as planned, so that was great. Probably learned a few lessons along the way, and they're plain to see the lessons because it's 100% transparent. We have 700 people, and everyone can see what everyone's OKRs are. And some of them are a bit more specific than others. Some of them are kind of vague. A lot of them are really solid, but we're still working out the kinks. But engagement-wise, I think that's kind of telling that we got everybody to sign up. If people didn't sign up, that would be a bad sign for their engagement. And now we're kind of going to just do the quality better and better each quarter upcoming. And so work in progress, but so far so good.
And sign up was voluntary, or was there like pressure to sign? How did you guys get such high?
Yeah. We said it was an expectation.
Okay.
We didn't say, your bonus is going to be fully based on your OKRs. We specifically said it wouldn't be fully based on your OKRs. We did make it clear that it was an expectation, and we've got these goals for the year, and did analogies about, buildings needing all the bricks, or if there's a few missing, bad things happen.
Cool.
Yep.
So before On Deck, I worked at some very large companies. The one before On Deck had 20,000 employees. The one before that had 60,000. And what I saw is that people weren't, and this bears out in some data that I got from my team, managers don't get training till the average age of 40. Right? And On Deck, the average age is 29, which means the average manager age is also 29. And very quickly, what I did is I bought an off-the-shelf training program, and it was a disaster. Right? It was not good. And the reason for that is the way that we do work is very much the way that we do work, and I couldn't buy it. And quickly recalibrated. I have an incredible team. They're all here. Hi, guys. And we built bespoke programs. So they're custom to us, management essentials, leadership essentials, to really help managers understand the unspoken way that things get done at On Deck and the explicit way that things get done at On Deck. And that's been incredibly successful. We're going to start to measure the effectiveness of it, but based on the anecdotal feedback and all of the surveys, we're getting things like best training I've ever had, when can I do this again, can I please stick with this cohort, I liked it so much. And so those are some of the things that I think as people start to build out these companies is going to be really important. There are great partners out there, but you really need to pick and choose what you buy and what you build. So.
Great.
So I'm thinking of what to add to that. So just in general, high level, I think at JET we think of engagement as I'm sure everyone else does, multidimensional. So we've kind of organized our strategy, and it truly has to be a strategy because to the question what works and doesn't work, what works is a well-rounded strategy versus like putting all your hope or desire into one small set of things. So you continue to build and evolve your engagement strategy. But I always think about like what is very basic. So today, what's very basic in the market in general, especially with startups, is the cool office, the free lunches, the free snacks, the ping pong table, the pool table, all of those sorts of things. We call them perks, and they're cool perks, and people like them. And then you think about what is the foundation or the core or the common thread. So it's the mission, the vision, the values, the strategy, and how are we engaging people in those things and ensuring that there is alignment, that there is diversity of thought, that people are able to help us shape and evolve those areas. And then I think about like, okay, then how are we going to innovate around engagement? And I think for me, especially with JET being, having a center of gravity in technology and being a tech company, it is somewhat around technology. So we're looking at technology to help empower people and help empower our managers. So we've selected a couple of technology tools to help us with that. One is more of an enterprise level administered surveying platform, but it's not like your traditional annual survey with 120 questions that you have to pour through an action plan all year. So it's more like real-time engagement, pulsing. And another technology is one that puts the power in the manager's hands to be able to assess the mood of their teams and be able to survey themselves, not with prescriptive questions, but things that are really relevant and happening now that they can respond to either anonymously or engaging the team face to face. So, and then the third technology is one that I think it's really very interesting, and it requires quite a bit of investment. We're actually building a custom internal communications app for our people that will be a content management system, will serve to engage, and we really think it will help scale the culture, because when you think about going from 100 to 1,000 people to tens of thousand people to 50,000, 100,000 people in the future, and you think about the fact that we have salaried people, we have hourly people, we have people in warehouses that are picking and packing and shipping goods, we have people that are on the phones taking care of customers. Like, how do you create a virtual community within the company? And so through this application, not everyone has email, and so when you think about that hourly population, if you have one and they are more isolated or geographically remote, it's pretty traditional unless you have some sort of technology platform to kind of even the playing field. And so we think that this application, is something that will be on their phones. Everybody has a phone, whether they have company email or not, and be able to get a push notification with a video or a message or a document in a way that's relevant and modern and appropriate. And again, bringing everyone together as a virtual community. So that's kind of how we think about engagement. And I agree with other panelists that engagement is something that is much more tangible than a metric or, we have an ESAT score on our monthly survey, how happy are you at JET? And it's a number, and that's great, and the number's been great, but you can really touch and feel whether people are happy and engaged by the way that they interact with each other.
I actually have a YouTube video that is flagged in my bookmarks. That is, it's just this short little ditty that's like, it's okay to have feelings. And we'll often play it in meetings, and just if someone's having feelings, we'll turn it around. Ophelia.
So this is an initiative, and I'll talk a little bit about one of the initiatives that I started, but listening. I know that sounds like common sense, but everyone's roles as a member of any of your organizations is just to listen. So when I started, I asked my team, my HR team, for a list of the 25 to kind of 40 members of the organization cross-functionally from every department, different levels of seniority, different levels of tenure, and different along the spectrum of performance. And I basically played the role of ethnographer and just asked them, kind of interviewed them about their experience at the organization. I did it off-site, so they really felt comfortable. And I listened and listened and listened. And one of the things that I heard was this need for value, a value codification, or a need for a vision statement, which we didn't have. We'd sort of taken for granted that our product was our vision statement. But we were at this point now where we kind of need that. But two of the other things that I heard from listening intently and kind of mapping these patterns was we had really strong microcultures, because we're kind of community of crafts people, right? We have technical designers and merchandisers and HR, and I didn't think that was something we should fix. I thought that was something we should leverage. So I didn't want to create this kind of monoculture. And then I also kept hearing that the culture really came from a bottoms up. So it kind of, even though we had a very strong top leadership team, the heart of the culture was really living with the doers and the executors and the people that were really in the trenches doing the work, not managing the work. So in listening to that, what I realized is that we needed to leverage all those things and let that sort of cross-functional team create the values and create the vision. So something that we literally did as of 2 weeks ago is each department has now elected a kind of representative from their department. And rather than pulling all those people together and doing a focus group and doing more listening, we're actually going to have those people come together as a group of about 30 representatives and create our values and create our vision. So I'll kind of call upon my consulting chops and really run that like a facilitated session and let them create that for themselves. And then they'll actually go back to their departments and actually announce that and talk through it and get their departments involved in that. And I feel like, obviously that session will be engaging for that group, but they'll hopefully bring that mindset back and bring that kind of autonomy back to their departments in sharing that. So I'm hoping it works, fingers crossed. I'll obviously kind of circle back and let you know, but it's looking great. Everyone voted, so that's a good sign to start.
Cool. So one of the things that I'm particularly curious about being at Etsy, because we're growing very quickly, and like 3 years ago, I think we were a startup. This year, we're not so much a startup; we're more a teenager. And I think, as many tech companies, we have a lot of soft perks that I don't know when, but at some point, sort of became like this expected thing. So ping pong tables, et cetera. One great example is we have this program called Eatsy, which is a catered lunch twice a week, but it is from like locally sourced caterers, and we use like recyclable plates and bowls and composting and all of that stuff. And what happened is when we started to scale, it became incredibly expensive, and it also became like feeding 100 people is very different than feeding like 800 people. And so it sort of became like we're hosting this massive wedding twice a week. And so I'm curious, because we're still continuing to grow at a pretty like phenomenal rate, and I'm interested in how you guys have scaled some of your initiatives around employee engagement, and yeah, so mostly so I can learn from you guys on how that works.
So yeah, we've grown pretty rapidly at Shutterstock, and so far we've tended to really want to continue to invest in some of the things which are going to sound even weirder now because we have 800 people and we have the wedding every day. But so far so good. It's really good for community building. What we have done is begun to manage expectations that financial resources are not infinite, so that and you'll see this manifesting in maybe medical plan changes this year, which are pretty subtle, but beginning to sow the seeds that different company phases can mean a different value proposition. Maybe we'll not do the lunches one day, but we'll invest in more employee equity. Like everyone has equity in the company still at 800, and that's something we may hold on to longer than we hold on to lunches. So we're just going to say we're going to continue to invest in the team, but it may take different forms as we evolve.
So that's a really great point, by the way. I do think, and I can only speak for New York, but I do think that certain things now just are table stakes, and people are coming to you with assumptions, just like they're assuming they're going to get medical benefits, right? And we struggled through that as well. Okay, can we feed 200, 300, 400, 500 the way we fed 50? And one of the things that we did is, instead of having lunches come in, we gave everyone a Seamless account, and it's a use it or lose it. So it's not like we're not doing the lunches, but here you go, feed yourself. We're just going to fund it. And that kind of goes very subtly to that whole entire line of, you are responsible for yourself. The company is here to provide certain frameworks, and whether that's your career, whether that's your personal stuff, whatever it might be. And that's worked really well. I will tell you, I was extremely fearful that there would be backlash, because we took something away where they thought that there was a $13 value twice a week and replaced it with $20 on a Seamless account. And the feedback has been ridiculously awesome. Thank you so much. This is amazing. We love it. But that doesn't come without communication. And we've been very, very clear. We do town halls once a month. As the company grows, things are going to change. And it's never a rip the Band-Aid off, but people know that we are constantly thinking about the trade-offs. So we also equitize everybody right now. Is that the right thing to do? And as you scale, is that still the right thing to do? Do people in New York prefer equity, or do they prefer rent? Do they prefer equity or do they prefer a match on their 401k? So as the company grows, you're constantly having to think about the trade-offs, but communicate it to people so they don't feel cheated out of something that they signed up for.
I would say something very similar. I would also say we haven't made too many mistakes yet. Ask me in a year or two. It's only been 10 months. But we talk about whether things can scale up front. So it's kind of like on the checklist of discussion points when we roll out something new. The other thing that we've done is when we have funding for something, we try to build choice. So choice in terms of maybe offering 2 or 3 things that people can pick whatever is most effective for them. For example, and this was a joke, but the other day my team and I were talking about the fact that we give everyone at headquarters a free regional Crunch membership. And I jokingly said, can I get a 1-year supply of ice cream instead? Because I don't use the Crunch membership, but I would definitely eat all the ice cream. So I think that, yeah, I mean, for me, all I can say at this point is think about whether it can scale right up front. We have 3 core values: trust, transparency, and fairness, and they're very, very incredibly challenging values to actually bring to life. So for example, we had, at some point before I came, rolled out Seamless to everyone. And because one of our values is trust, we have no policies. None. We have... So...
Who's your lawyer?
We have a very risk-tolerant general counsel. I love him. So in any event, we decided to sunset Seamless. It wasn't really a takeaway. We said, okay, like Seamless is all over the place. We've done something really cool. We replaced it with like Getting Maple, who's also a startup that people love. How many people have had Maple? It's like, yeah, it's amazing. So we actually got Maple to jump over the river and come to Hoboken for us. So like one thing to do is to replace whatever you're taking away with something better but less expensive. Good luck with that.
Gratefulness is very interesting to me because there was a recent article that came out from an employee. She sent it to the CEO of Yelp. Did you guys all, do you know what I'm referencing? For those of you guys who aren't familiar, she was an employee who worked for Yelp. She was clearly dissatisfied. She sent a rather scathing letter to the CEO complaining about her salary in particular and her role. And there was a big sort of backlash, I think, from across the internet in response to that. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, and in particular, how I think it's important when we're talking about employee engagement to also talk about disengagement and how that impacts the workforce. What are you guys doing? How is that impacting your recruiting? What are you guys doing to screen for that? And what are your individual thoughts on that letter in general?
So we talked about this a little bit on our kickoff call, and I was actually glad to hear that some of us were aligned. To me, that email in particular didn't feel, or that blog post didn't feel like disengagement first. First, it felt like entitlement, which was a lot of the replies online. There was pieces of it for sure that were around disengagement. But I think the screening for that is something that we talk about a lot. Our office has no perks, there's no food, there's coffee and tea. The biggest perk you get is a product discount, which is amazing. But that's really what you're coming for. You're coming to work on the product, and there isn't really, we don't give equity to every employee. You know, that's definitely something we're talking about because we are now competing with the rest of this panel. But for a long time, we were only competing in our pretty traditional industry, which was fashion. Now, of course, tech companies and startups are coming into our industry, and we're having to start to think about this. But the way that we screen, and Emily, who's our head of talent acquisition sitting right here, is she sends them to our headquarters to go up in our freight elevator with our amazing freight elevator operator Berman, who's quite a personality. And our office is scrappy and it feels very much like a fashion startup. And she watches for their reaction to what that experience was like, because if they didn't feel like this is what they want, that's pretty clear that they're probably going to end up feeling the way that blog post. I doubt they'd write one like that, but they would feel the way that blog post ended up feeling. Versus if they felt like the way that a lot of us feel, that was so cool, that was so different. came out of the elevator smiling and thought our design floor with all of its, sketchboards and scraps of fabric and denim everywhere was awesome. That's probably the kind of person that we're looking for. That's kind of lack of entitlement versus what I think that blog post espoused bits of.
So, I was thinking a lot about this, and I thought, well, she was engaged in all the wrong things, right? I'm engaged. I want to talk about hours, I want to talk about comp, and I want to talk about fairness. And there is something, I think there's a double-edged sword about fairness. And when you're talking about comp, I do like what Laszlo Bock said about pay unfairly. And the way that we think about this, and I think about it very much as tone at the top. And I don't know any of the leadership at Yelp. I don't, but subsequently there was another termination at Yelp. And they responded in social media. And mom. Yes, right? So, and I don't know if you guys know, but another person got fired, and she tweeted, "Yelp fired me. I'm a single mom, and I was caring for my sick boyfriend." In any event, they responded on social media to this woman. And that keeps me up at night. Not the employee tweeting, the manager tweeting back. Right? That's what I think is very dangerous. And I think as young companies get older and have young leadership, right, teams and executives, how you set the tone at the top is a really important thing in employee engagement. And in this era specifically, where it's all about, you know what, Peter, I'm gonna send you a Facebook thing and you're gonna send it back to me. At a certain point, you forget who your audience is. And I think that we run the risk of forgetting who our audience is. And so what we do we talk about social media all the time. And companies that have gone public do this training a lot. Say nothing, retweet nothing, don't, unless it comes from our marketing team. But what we do is we work really hard to communicate financial information internally so that people understand where we are. So that's a very, and that's dangerous. It means that our trading windows are very, very small. People don't love it, but they do love that we talk to them about the health of our company. And I think that's an important thing in employee engagement. And I think it's something perhaps that maybe those two specific people were lacking. I think that if you make smart comp decisions too, I think that's really important, and that fairness thing goes away. So when I'm thinking about young companies starting up and they're 1, 2, 3, 10 years old, at a certain point you have to have a real hard conversation about comp in the context of the geography that you're in. Salesforce, much richer and bigger than all of us, just did a huge study, right, and increased their fixed cost basis by $3 million in order to fix the fairness problem. And I do think that at a certain point, all of us have to think about those things so that that example doesn't happen to one of us.
So what about measuring data? We live sort of in a society now where big data is a thing. We have access to ridiculous amounts of information, and we're able to do really incredible things with that. But there's still some controversy on whether or not it makes sense to measure engagement in any way. And for people who do measure it, how is it measured exactly? How do you guys handle this? If you're collecting the data, what are you doing with it? What does that look like for you?
So, testing. Yeah, I'm back. I'm on. At previous employers, we've used some things, so the classic Gallup 12 engagement factors. They're nothing new, but they kind of work. They roughly align with, say, Dan Pink's in mastery, autonomy, purpose. When you look at the 12 questions, they fit. So we've used those, and they have the benefit of, giving you some specific action that might come out of it. Unlike, say, the NPS score, which is just this number. And you're like, oh, great, it went up, but I'm not quite sure why. But with Gallup 12, you're assessing people's connection with the company mission, whether they feel they have the resources to be successful. There's very specific manager-related stuff, company-related stuff, individual-related stuff. So they can be quite good. And again, I think they'll be part of our future at Shutterstock as we begin to measure these things more carefully story, and somebody mentioned a platform. One, tip, and we're really excited about going with Culture Amp.
Love them. They're awesome.
Okay, cool. Another happy customer. So yeah, this seems to be like pretty low cost, and then the advantage of that is you get your data, and in my past, you do the SurveyMonkey thing, and then you get the export to PowerPoint, and you're cutting it for this client and that client, and trying to keep it anonymous, and it's just this really long process, and the data's stale by the time anyone kind of sees it. But with Culture Amp, as long as you got 5 respondents, you'll have immediate access. If you're a manager, you'll see what the pulse of your team, in real time, and it's really, really pretty cool, and way less work for the HR team to be slicing and dicing PowerPoints.
So in that company that I mentioned, where we engaged people, or the least productive people, but we used Gallup 12, and it was really interesting to be able to then splice that. What I would say, and I've said this before, is if you're doing that, you need to compare it to the measurements of your company, right? So it's not just the measurement of engagement for the sake of engagement. Lacking that, by the way, I mean, certain companies aren't profitable right off the bat. There are other things that you should be measuring and actually holding people accountable to, and many companies don't. Turnover rates, attrition rates, those are all things, the rate of recruitment that we just seem to still not talk about, that are really easy in order to be able to see if you have the right people in the right jobs, i.e. your managers.
So when you're growing really fast and building really fast, I think you should keep the data simple. So we're measuring on a month-to-month basis through our surveying platform, Glint, the ESAT question, or the Uber question, the NPS score. It's been in the low 80s the last and first 3 months. We've only done it 3 months. And that's out of 100, so it's pretty good. So we measure the ESAT, and we track that. And then we also look at retention. So in the last 20 months or so that we've been a company, we've had attrition of only 3%. And that's across exempt hourly, which I think is really, really good. Yeah.
It's very impressive.
So those are kind of the 2 things we're tracking right now. And then I think that surveys, whether it's Culture Amp or Glint, I do think that to some extent the managers and leaders feel like surveys are something done to them, and like even if they have access to the results, it's like kind of scary. So we're looking at this tool that I mentioned earlier. It's called Butterfly. It's a new technology. And you basically roll it out to your managers and leaders, and you put the tool in their hands and empower them to measure engagement and mood and to do something about it. So I think that that's another dimension that in the future we'll be able to take advantage of through technology.
So we got the 5-minute signal about 5 minutes ago, and I do want to end with one quick thing, because I want to make sure we have enough time for questions, and we can engage in a little bit more conversation with the audience. But just to do a quick fire round in 15 seconds or less, what's one nugget of wisdom you guys would leave for people here today as they're looking to grow their internal engagement at their own companies?
So I'm glad you're doing what you're doing at Rag & Bone with the values, because I think that's just so important. If your companies haven't established their values, I would say, do that, and intentionally and thoughtfully. You don't want people to hear the values and then call BS. So yeah, I think that's tremendous. It's kind of links back to what are you engaging with.
The one thing that I would say is you always have to answer the why. If people don't know why you're doing something, you're going to fail. That's all.
For me, it's communication, and it kind of goes to why, but just targeted communication, relevant communication. If you really want to build engagement and a sense of ownership, make sure you're communicating effectively with people.
I would say, as you're thinking about things you want to fix about your business or your organization, make sure that they're actually things you should be fixing instead of leveraging.
So this brings us to the end of our panel. Thank you so much, you guys. That was really informative. Please join me in a round of applause. So we can open up the floor to questions.
Hi, my name is Jessica. We got two people. I stood up first. I'm the Director of Employee Experience at DigitalOcean, and this kind of stemmed from Dina's, you're trusting everyone with your seamless policy. Good luck. But what does everyone do when the 1% keeps ruining it for the 99%? And how many times do you let the 1% ruin it before you take something away or change a policy or have to add a dollar amount limit or something?
So you never let the 1% ruin it. So I'll give you an example. When I got there, the 1% was our top grossing sales agent, and he was ruining it. You know, forget the example. And we fired him, and my peers and my boss looked at me like, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Watch what happens." And it's a force multiplying effect. When you take that 1% out, the happiness and the engagement that creates, you've just always, always, always underestimate it.
So that's, is this thing still working? Yeah. That's a question that we get asked a lot because one of our 3 core values is trust. And it is interesting to live without any policies. But if you say that you trust people, then you really have to trust them. You have to trust their judgment. And the key is, who are you bringing in, right? And like really making sure that you're bringing in people that have a great sense of ownership and are going to spend wisely, make decisions wisely, et cetera. So I agree with Lorna that you don't let them ruin it. So we have committed to scaling our values. You know, it's easier to trust 10 people and 100 people and 1,000 people. It's going to get tougher and tougher every week and every year. And when you're a 10,000, 20,000 plus person company, to still have no policies is somewhat scary, but also very empowering. So you really just have to, like Lorna said, address those situations and make sure that you have strong leaders that are coaching and that you have a culture that really kind of takes care of itself and builds accountability.
Yeah, so I would say if you can't fire the 1% that keeps ruining it, and there are all sorts of nuances that would say you can't. There's some situations where you just can't. Like if it was the top grossing salesperson, you really needed to keep them or any number of reasons. Give them the initiative to lead. So one of the things that we have a 1% that is always complaining that, this is too corporate. This feels very corporate. And so when we thought about coming up with an internal communication strategy, that person's going to own the making this not corporate feeling, because that person's going to definitely ruin it if anyone else does it. He, she is going to say, that's too corporate. So I think that's the other thing, is to empower them to be the ones spearheading that initiative. Not only will that make sure the initiative isn't something they ruin, but it'll also hopefully enforce empathy in the rest of the initiatives that ultimately have to get rolled out for them.
The one other thing I would add to that is that I think it's important to just always be aware of the difference between the 1% coming from an entitlement perspective and the 1% coming from an actual need, but it's a minority need. So a great example of that is that we have a dog policy at Etsy, or actually it's brand new, we didn't, but we're a dog-friendly company, and so people would just bring their dogs in and puppies would run around, and people would email Poop 911 and be like, whose dog is this? It's a problem. And but we had some employees who had really severe allergies, and because dogs were such an integral part of our culture and still are, they felt really afraid to speak up about it. And so we started to hear that through back channels that it was a problem. And we ended up rehashing our dog policy. We still allow them, but for example, they're not allowed on furniture anymore. They have to be on a leash at all times. They're not allowed in conference rooms. We have dog-free spaces for people who have allergies. we got huge backlash for that because people were like, it's like 2 people and we're, 798 people who love dogs and they should just work remotely. And so it became a thing, and we ended up realizing and putting forth this value for ourselves that sometimes the needs of the few can actually outweigh the desires of the many, and I think it's just important to recognize that nuanced difference.
Hi, Jordan Berman from OFC Office Channel. I think when a lot of folks think about engagement, they think of employees that not only come in the morning and are excited, but go to the happy hour after, are playing ping pong late at night, drinking all that beer, which is clearly good for everyone. But my question is, do you ever get to a point where it swings too far, where employees are never unplugging, and they sort of can't separate their work from their personal life? You hear about like some companies have the Firm 40, where they don't want you checking email at night when you're watching, The Walking Dead or whatever, which is a great show. So do you guys ever see that sort of like, ooh, they're too engaged? They actually need to have their own life outside of the office?
Yeah, I mean, I think in similar ways, I think society has sort of gotten too plugged in a lot of ways and cutting off, even like in your personal life, people are just like, I mean, I don't know how I survived before my iPhone, and like, I didn't have Google Maps at my disposal every single second, and people couldn't get in touch with me. So I have it on me all the time, and the very first thing I do in the morning is like roll over, pick up my phone, check my email, check the weather, like log on to Facebook, whatever, for like 2 minutes, and then eventually get out of bed. Like, is that healthy? Probably not. And I think it's in similar veins, like if I'm on vacation, I'll like soft check email, and it's almost like habitual. It becomes like almost this weird like hit of dopamine or something to do that. And so I think 2 things on that. I think the first is that I think it's important to encourage people to take ownership of that for themselves and to make it an acceptable environment for them to unplug. There's a company, and I think it's called 42nd Floor or something like that. They're based in San Francisco. I may not have the name of the company correctly, but they have this really interesting take where they have a mandatory vacation whenever someone starts the job. So they put them on payroll. They don't come into the office for the first 2 weeks. They're not issued any kind of assets. They're not issued a company email, nothing. And the idea there is that they're not employed by the previous employer anymore. So they don't have that email to check. And we're not going to give you an email. We're not going to give you any assets. We're not going to give you any work. We're not going to introduce you to people to even know who to talk to. So you're not going to have any work from us for 2 weeks. And when you have those 2 weeks off where you're fully refreshed, you then come into the company and you can start. But those first 2 weeks are paid, and it's like PTO. So I think companies are starting to get really creative with how to like really set the tone and say, this is a thing in our culture. I think it's something Etsy does actually really, really well, where for me, when I started working there, I've only been there about 9 months, and it was kind of culture shock, because I was like, what do you mean you're on sabbatical? But I can get in touch with you, right? And they're like, no, I deleted my email from my phone. And it's like a thing that people there do. And I think that's because the leadership team at Etsy, like Chad Dickerson, who's our CEO, recently adopted a baby from Korea, and he took the full parental leave. He was just gone. He didn't talk to anybody. And that was he did a really good job of making sure that like there were clear decision makers and the work was getting done and the business was in a good place. But he was at home like taking care of his child. And that went a really long way for setting the tone for how people, particularly men, take paternity leave. I think in a lot of companies that's there's like a lot of gender stuff that comes into play around that, where women tend to take the full leave and men tend to take like 2-3 weeks. And is that really fair? I mean, what if you're in like a same-sex relationship and it's 2 men? Like, one of you guys is gonna have to take the time. How do you do that without it coming off like, oh, well, you shouldn't do that? So I think it's really important for the leadership to set that tone actually, and to actually set examples and encourage behavior to check out. Does that answer your question, or did I just talk for 10 minutes about?
No, I think it's okay, but Lorna almost made a remark about her employees are 29. They may want to be hanging out at the happy hour, but the older ones.
No, there aren't any. No, that would be me. So here's the deal. I think that we work really hard, right? I mean, people there work really hard, and there are teams that are there till 8 o'clock, and there are teams that leave at 5. And they see the differences, and it actually comes out in the survey. Well, I'm here, but look at that team. And so what we've started to do, and it's about the leadership, it's how do we actually, what are our norms? What happened when we were 50 people is a little bit different. How we work is a little bit different than when we were 200, than when we're 600. So let's actually, as a leadership team, start talking about norms at our company, not rules and not policies. But last month we had an offsite, and one of the topics was this idea of, well, do we email on the weekends, right? Is that something that as a company we do? And if we, so, and I'm like public enemy number one. I will email my team all weekend long and not say, I don't need a response. And 99.9% of the time, that there's no need for anyone to respond to me, right? All employee issues, everyone knows, right, happen at 5 o'clock on Friday. My people are still there. So what are our norms as a company? And I think that's a very worthwhile conversation for a leadership team to have as you're scaling, you know, hyper or sonic. Either way, like, you really should have those conversations.
Hi. Oh, is it on? Okay, great. Hello. My name is Rhonda from Barclay Center. So it's an arena. You mentioned earlier smartphones, and also you mentioned rewards and recognition. Have any of you had to deal with employees who are not at a fixed location, at a cubicle, desk, and so forth? Have any of you used a reward and recognition program, software, using a phone, an app in particular, where you can reward employees who are moving around a lot, like our employees do?
There's a company called NextJump, actually, and they have a really great take on this, and they built an app that they released for free. If you go to their website, NextJump, they built it, and they had really incredible success with it and open sourced it, so it's available if you just want to play around with it and see if it's something you'd want to scale.
And one more for good measure, You Earned It is something that's a pretty good tool. It's not free, but pretty effective, very popular at a previous job of mine. Real-time peer-to-peer feedback, and you as a company decide how you're going to fund it. It's a point system, and the points might be equivalent to cents. It might take a lot of them to get enough for a Starbucks gift card or whatever, but hopefully not. It'll be too cheap with them. But you can basically choose your generosity level and then empower every member of the team or with a budget of points every month or quarter. And last job was hugely popular. People just really were craving that tangible way to recognize their peers and give them public high fives, and you can see who's praising who, and it's kind of fun.
So we have time for one more question. Do we have any? One more? Okay.
Hi, I'm Melissa, and I was just thinking while you guys were all speaking how I love that so many of you are constantly pulsing your employee base rather than the once a year, here's your chance to tell us how we're doing kind of thing. So I'm just wondering, what do you do with that feedback, and do you have any advice for maybe those of us who aren't in a startup environment, who may be a bit slower to act or to move? Do you have any advice that we can take from the startup world to enact in our organizations?
So I'll give a quick response. So I think very important to do something with the data, and especially in our real-time 2016. If your survey happens and then too many weeks or even minutes go by and people are like, "Did you fix it yet?" So yeah, I would so strongly recommend taking the data, sharing it back. Previous company, we just did a all hands, said, "Hey, here's what you guys said. Bunch of concerns, suggestions. Here's the three kind of biggest topics, based on the crowdsourcing. We're going to address those, and here's how we're going to do it." And one of them was actually installing You Earned It, to go back to my last thing, and that was a big hit. People liked it. So yeah, get back to them quickly, and don't bite off more than you can chew, and follow through.
And I would say if you're still in startup mode and let's say you're under 50 people, right? If you need a survey to tell you how your company's feeling, then you've already screwed up. You've already done something wrong. You've already not hired great managers or not trained great people into those management positions, or if you have a flat hierarchy, you're not kind of cultivating those kind of feedback skill sets and empathy skill sets. So to me, like, that's why I think I always have had an allergy. Now we're at 300. We probably do need to do something around those lines, which is why I've kind of put a representative in each department that will kind of start to take those pulses for me. But yeah, I would say if you need that already, then what's wrong? Why do you need that? Why is that not being brought to the table in leadership meetings? Why aren't people raising their hands and honestly and openly and comfortably saying, hey, I feel disengaged, or I don't feel like I'm getting enough praise or recognition? What's wrong with the culture already by the time that you feel like you really need a survey to do that?
And I would say this, if you're not able to do, and we do it twice a year, right? I mean, on top of 500 survey monkeys that we send the org on every topic imaginable. But if you're only doing it once a year, or you're so big where the change to pulse is hard, what you really have to remember, besides what Peter said, you have to act on that data, right? So seamless and 401k matching came from our data. But the other thing is you have to advertise the wins all the time. HR people are not marketers, and right, a lot of them spend their times kind of in the shadows justifying their departments and their existence. So you really have to think about, what did we get out of this survey to make it really good for you, the employee, and here's why I'm going to ask you again to do it, and again, and again, and again.
I also think one tactical thing you can do is, this is getting in the weeds a little bit, but if the leadership team is like very, very corporate and somewhat averse to HR in any kind of like modern HR type of company, I think one thing you can sort of do behind the scenes is to take a look at the pulse information that you're grabbing and compare that to what the exit interview data is looking at. And if you are asking very similar questions but differently, you can actually start to get to a point behind the scenes where you can like say, this is what a happy employee looks like, this is what a not happy employee looks like, and based on how people, the exit interview data. And so you can take a look at that pulse info and you can actually start to pick out, like, this person looks like they're a real threat of being lost. And then you can have an HR business partner take them out for a cup of coffee, start having exploratory conversations about what's going on, what motivates them, what makes them tick, and then start to put some things in place for just save one person at a time.
Great. I want to thank our panel. I did prepare some notes to summarize. I realized there's nothing I'm going to say that's going to make the content that was talked about here today any better. So please join me in thanking our moderator, our panelists. Truly, thank you. It was a great discussion.